Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a weird preachy video potentially, but it's kind of directed at myself and kind of trying to work through my own little kind of journey on social media and all that sort of stuff. I started posting on Instagram probably 2015 or something like that, when I was just trying to start playing guitar more live, get gigs and that sort of stuff, and there wasn't really that much of my playing out there. No one really particularly knew that I played guitar, other than sort of my family and a couple of people. So that's kind of where I started off with Instagram, and I was posting with the idea that it was a place that people could go to kind of get a sense of what I sound like when I play guitar. I think there's a lot of kind of sport element to guitar playing and competition, which isn't necessarily there with some other musicians. Like I never really heard someone discussing which violinist plays faster than any other violinist, but maybe it does exist in those kind of worlds as well. But I think this is what leads to this kind of fear-based approach where we kind of feel like we have to be perfect. And you can come away from like a live gig, where you might have one or two or three solos, depending on the type of gig, and you think, oh, I've really shown myself up to be a dodgy player because you made one or two little slip-ups during the solo, or even big slip-ups. I think this fear kind of thing is not particularly helpful. Something I was looking at quickly, I was looking at like the Effortless Mastery is a book by someone with a second name Werner, and it talks a lot about this kind of fear-based approach to music, which does sound weird, doesn't it? Because the idea of playing guitar for me is that I'm enjoying the thing. I've always kind of found that I enjoyed practicing more than the live element, being that I'm kind of introverted and stuff. But I think this is then what leads people to make decisions like to mime a track or a bit of playing on Instagram or on YouTube, there was a thing where Jack Gardner and Jared Dines and these people were calling it out. I think that raised some issues about kind of whether people thought they were being jealous, whereas kind of Jack Gardner is one of the kind of great players. I'm not sure that he's particularly jealous of people that are faking their stuff, but whether or not you think it's appropriate to mime or speed up playing, or even just make out that you can play a thing which in reality 87 times out of 100 you couldn't, I think comes from this kind of fear-based approach. And so something I made a decision about relatively recently, I think, was that you kind of have to let go this idea of being a perfect guitar player, and more just enjoy the moments that do occur. And it's kind of changed things quite a lot for me. I get people ask occasionally, how do you upload so frequently, all those sorts of things, and the answer is that generally things happen in 1, 2 or 3 takes, unless I'm having a really bad day, in which case I'll just keep going over and over until something that I'm not terribly ashamed of occurs. And I think that's helped me a bit. And the reason that I kind of made that decision was that I didn't want to ever get into a scenario where I played in front of someone and they were like, well, this is completely not the guitarist that I thought you were. You don't really sound anything like you do when you play on your videos, and you're okay for 45 seconds or a minute. When you actually play out live, all of your ideas sound kind of mediocre and your playing is kind of average. I never wanted that to be the case. I kind of wanted it to be that I sound like I sound, and whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not sure, but it's kind of that is how I sound when I play guitar. And it's kind of been liberating because I can then just play in front of someone and you can let whatever happens happen, and you're not tied to this idea that everyone thought you were a perfect guitar player. which I think is kind of useful. And then this also kind of ties into the idea of writing versus improvisation, or playing things that you've already played before versus new things. And for me, this is kind of a similar thing. Like, I know from doing it in the past that I can spend, a couple of weeks learning a solo by someone else, and gradually working it up to speed with a metronome, and then building up to a performance where I sit in front of a camera and I have a few goes, or maybe loads of goes to try and get that thing perfect, and then invariably a week or so later that moment is gone and I can only remember tiny parts of what I'd worked on for ages. And I kind of thought, well, that's doesn't really fill me with much confidence, or not really a good feeling. It feels more sport-like and not really like a musical endeavour. It's not to say that there's not a great deal of use to be found from learning other people's licks and stuff, particularly in the jazz world, transcribing licks, which I still do. But I kind of do it in a smaller kind of way, rather than spending whole weeks and months trying to lead up to this one performance which I capture in front of a camera, and then I forget about that lick because I move on to something else. Not lick, but solo. And then that kind of has also changed the way that I think I want to view other music. So for instance, if you look at other players and you're looking for what the mistakes, so this is what I'm most guilty of in my own playing, is that I'm looking at over a minute of music, or 3 minutes, and I've got a specific focus on which bits make me sound like a less than perfect musician. Like bits where I've rushed, or bits where the note choice was ugly, or bits where an out of tune bend or something like that. Those are the bits that I'm focusing on, and in turn that then reflects on how you look at other musicians. So instead of looking at like 5 minutes of Steve Vai live and you pick out 3 or 4 points where he was a less than perfect guitarist, and then that makes you feel okay about your playing, I think it's more helpful to try and look at the bigger picture. So for instance, I can listen to Miles Davis or John Coltrane, and in moments I can find bits that aren't perfect. There's a point where there's a split note on the trumpet during a solo, or there's this point where John Coltrane plays this fast line which is ahead of the beat, but I don't feel it actually tells you much about what it means to have been John Coltrane or Miles Davis, or what their contribution is to music, to judge by 1 minute of imperfection, not even 1 minute, but 1 moment of. And that's what I'm trying to get away from, that kind of micro-analysis of stuff, which doesn't really help me. And then this is also kind of makes you view some of the comments you read online. Like, I've read things like Chris Buck is an average guitar player, or Josh Smith is an average guitar player, or you read these kind of things, John Mayer is an average guitar player, things that are objectively not true. So a lot of rain. Things that are just objectively not true, but I think come from this place of comparing musicians, and you end up in this kind of sport mentality, and instead I'm trying to get away from that. And what is there about Chris Buck's playing which is great? What is there about Josh Smith's playing that's great? Robin Ford, there's loads of great guitarists, and we've got access to lots of their playing more than ever before, and instead of focusing on what you dislike or what you don't like or whatever, it's probably better just to spend more energy focusing on areas that you really do like. And so this is kind of how I'm thinking about this kind of mindset, and how I want to be, how I'm trying to be kind of more musical, and make stuff which sounds reliably good on a more regular basis. I'm trying to reframe the way that my mind kind of works. I think I could make stuff sound better if I spent more time just writing out solos or rehearsing stuff more. But for me, I kind of know that if I practice that thing for long enough, it'll be okay at a level where that'll work. But for me, I'm more concerned about what I can create in the moment, and just let that be what it is and then move along to something else. That's how I'm able to keep doing things quite frequently, and kind of just losing that kind of perfectionist slant on stuff, which I think doesn't necessarily help anyone anyway. And like Jack and Jared were saying in their videos, I think it does possibly create some negative impact on others if all you ever see of their playing is absolute perfection or unrealistic perfection. I'm not sure that that's a particularly positive thing. So that's also part of why I try to present things kind of honestly, and I'm not going to upload stuff which actively makes me look awful, but I try to keep things authentic-ish. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on this, and this morning I uploaded an outtake, specifically because some of it was okay and then the end of it was bad, but that's kind of my thoughts on trying to chuck away the idea of perfectionism and enjoy the moment of music. Anyway, I hope that's sort of useful in some way. I don't know how, but like and subscribe if this is the sort of stuff you're into. Cheers.